Hello, everybody. I see a lot of people from near and far. So people from Vietnam, Indonesia, and people, from closer, like Romania, Italy. Hello and welcome, everybody. So yes, this is a talk on motivation. I've been interested in motivation for a good chunk of my professional life now, and in fact, my interest in motivation culminated, with the book I wrote for Helbling, my host today. And thank you very much for inviting me. Which came out in 2017. The book title is Creating Motivation, and it's not a coincidence because I think it's a teacher's job, or it's a leader's job, if you prefer, to create an environment within which people, by people I mean our students, can thrive both as individuals and as a collective. Now, motivation is a really complex, fascinating topic, but it's also very, very tricky. Now, I personally don't believe you can actually motivate anybody to do anything for you. And I think my opinion seems to be in line, with a lot of research being carried out on this topic. In English, there's a very old adagio: you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Well, that seems to apply to an English language teaching classroom as well. Why? Because motivation is not something that gets done to you. It's a personal journey. Nobody has one of these magical wands, like a Harry Potterish wands, that with a flick of a wrist, and you motivate somebody to learn something for you. I wish, but I don't think it can be done. You have to have that fire burning in your belly. All anybody and a teacher and a leader can do is help the students ignite that fire, find that fire. So I said it's a tricky phenomenon because if on the one hand we can't motivate our learners to learn unless they do want to learn, on the other hand, there's quite a bit that we can do to demotivate our students. And sometimes, we do it unintentionally. For example, the way we speak with our students, the way we give them feedback, and we will see later on, some of these, some of the pitfalls that, that we would have to avoid. But let's start at the beginning. What is motivation? Well, motivation is simply, according to the very famous definition by Deci in 2005, why we do what we do. So basically, what is the drive? What gets us out of bed? So for our students, why do you want to learn English? Is it internally? Is it an internal trigger? Is it an external trigger? So people talk about, intrinsic, extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is supposed to be better. I don't think so. I don't think they're just different. Okay, so intrinsic motivation basically means that you do something because you take pleasure from it. So it's got a autotelic element. You do sports not because you want to stay in shape, but because you enjoy doing sports. So there's an internal reward. Extrinsic motivation is something different. Okay, you do sports because if you don't do sports, you get overweight. That's not good for your health. So if we want to transfer that to a classroom, okay, so if you're driven by intrinsic motivation, well, then you learn English because you like the language, you like the culture. Perhaps you like traveling, you like talking to people in English, you like the sounds of English, and so that you get a big kick out of being exposed to the language itself. Okay. Extrinsic motivation for learning a language, or for learning anything, in fact, is, unless you study and you work hard, okay, you won't be passing that exam, or unless your level improves, you won't be getting that job that you've been after for the last 2 or 3 years. So it's not the one is better than the other. It's not the one is purer than the other. It's completely different. And often, these two types of motivation are intertwined. So, but the core motivation is why we do what we do, and it's interesting because the etymology of motivation is motum. Motum a Latin word which means movement. That's why we talk about drive. Okay, so that's why we say, he's driven by greed, or a money-driven individual, a greed-driven individual. Interestingly, also, motivation and emotion share the same etymology. They both come from the same word. So emotion and motivation, they both come from motum, which means move in Latin. For a long time, one of the questions I used to ask myself, when I started teaching a long time ago, was how can I motivate my learners? And it took me a long time to realize that, in fact, that's not the right question to ask. And I used to take it personally if my students, didn't learn, if my students didn't come to class, or if my students didn't show enthusiasm and energy in class. In reality, I realized that a better question to ask is not so much how can I motivate my learners, because as I said before, motivation is a personal journey. There's only so much I can do to motivate somebody. Okay. I think, this is a much better question to ask. How can I help my learners motivate themselves? So how can I generate sufficient interest? How can I make an environment, okay, which leads to students motivate themselves? So in other words, how can I help the students, get determination? In fact, another word for motivation in the field is self-determination, which I actually think is a better way to define motivation. Because it's got that self thing. Motivation really is about you. Okay, it's a personal journey, as I keep saying. Okay, so this is a much better question to ask. How can I help my learners motivate themselves? So what can I do? I said at the beginning that it's the job of a teacher or the leader, okay, to shape an environment within which people can thrive. Okay, and so that's basically what the core of this talk is all about, and it's also the core of the book I wrote for Helbling in 2017. So I said it before, it's a complex phenomenon. Okay, and one of the things that makes motivation so complex is that it's a dynamic a dynamic phenomenon. So it's not linear, it's not sequential. In other words, just because your new students seem motivated when you first meet them on a Monday morning, okay, lesson one, unfortunately for us, this doesn't mean that the students will stay motivated, throughout the course, throughout the week, throughout the month, okay, sometimes throughout the lesson. Okay, so, and that's what makes it really, really complicated, which basically means that we have to come up, with ways, to keep our students on their toes. So, and that's the difficulty to deal with that. Well, motivation is dynamic because, human beings are dynamic. We go through phases, so you find that sometimes, but this happens to us too. Sometimes, you're very motivated, you're really looking forward to teaching a class. And some of the times, your level of tension, your attention, it kind of slumps. Okay. That's the way we are. And we're dealing with people because we're dealing with people, we have to put them in a situation whereby they can learn how to handle this phenomenon. So, there's a lot of confusion about a couple of things that surround motivation because it's a very vast area. There's a difference between amotivation and demotivation. The difference is that one is very, very serious, okay, and there's nothing we can do about it. The other one is not so serious. Amotivation. Somebody is amotivated if he or she was motivated at the beginning of the course, and then they lost the motivation along the way for some reason. Okay, demotivation is not so serious. Demotivation it just basically means that somebody may have lost the motivation temporarily. Okay, but it may come back. So in the first case, amotivation, if a student doesn't want to be here because perhaps it wasn't their idea to follow English classes, it was the parents' idea. Okay, so if they don't want to be here, if they were dragged to the English class, there's only so much you could do. Okay, so the student doesn't want to learn English, and you can't learn English for them, can you? That's the old adagio: you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So Demotivation is still serious, okay, because you still have to deal with somebody who's lost their motivation, but it's temporarily. It basically means that he or she was motivated in the beginning, but then for some reason, okay, which could be because the student is going through a rough time personally. It may be that perhaps what you're doing with them in class is not very interesting. Perhaps because they haven't found the right place in the group. It could be a variety of different reasons, okay, but whatever the reason is, okay, they feel like they kind of detached, okay, and they've lost the motivation, but they can get it back. That's the difference between demotivation and amotivation. I think it's necessary to to sort of learn how to differentiate these two phenomena, which are very, very different from one another. So in 2015, I was thinking about this question, and I was not I was not totally satisfied with the research on second language learners' motivation, and I'll tell you why. Most of this research is carried out in South Asia, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand. Okay, and there is some research carried out in Europe as well. Now, the issue here is that I don't work in China. I don't work in New Zealand. I don't work in Canada. I teach French, predominantly French students in Paris. Okay, so the context is completely different. You know that as well as I do, that you cannot divorce teaching from the context, the cultural and social context in which it happens. So the conclusions, the data that come out, of a study in China or in Canada or in New Zealand are totally irrelevant most of the time to what I have to do here. So what do? I believe in local solutions. Okay, so I talk to 135 of my students here. Okay, predominantly French, maybe 85% of them French. University students between 18, 19, 21 years old. And I asked them two very simple but very powerful questions. Okay, so question number one was, what do you find motivating? Okay, what is one factor? What is one thing that we do in class together which you find motivating? Okay, and it was a very open-ended question. Excuse me. And the second question, just as powerful, what is one thing that we do in class which demotivates you? Okay, so one thing that really turns you on and one thing that doesn't turn you on, that totally makes you switch off. And the interviews were carried out in French, the students, native language. And of course, what the students come up with, it's always eye-opening, And I'm going to share some of the quotes the students, some of the things that the students said. But based on what they said, they came up with the framework, okay, which I've called GPS. GPS is not the kind of GPS that you're familiar with. GPS is a completely different thing, and it stands for G, group processes, or perhaps you're more familiar with the term group dynamics. It's the same thing. Okay, P stands for priming. Okay, priming means getting somebody ready for you, getting somebody ready for the task at hand. And S stands for surprise and stimulation. What I mean by stimulation is cognitive stimulation, so up here, intellectual, and also affective, emotional stimulation. This is all based on what the students told me when I asked the questions that I mentioned earlier on. Okay, so I want to share some of the quotes, okay, and then we will highlight each single one of these of the three elements that make up the acronym, okay, together. And I would be really interested to see if any of these things resonate with you. So this is what Thibaut told me. So this is my translation. I like activities that promote a sense of friendship. He used the word friendship. This is a really powerful quote, one of the most profound and powerful things a student has ever come up with to me. What Thibaut meant was what educational psychologists refer to as affiliation. So it's not my job, and I don't think it should be any teacher's job, to make sure, the students, become friends. Okay. It's great if it happens. Okay. But, but this is, or that they end up dating each other. This is not a dating agency, a classroom. It is like it's a social phenomenon, that's for sure. Okay. And, people are social animals. So we crave that interaction. We crave the human warmth. Okay, we want to belong. So education psychologists call it affiliation. In any group, okay, people are looking to belong. Okay, people are craving that sense of togetherness, that sense of closeness. Okay, so affiliation is really interesting. The etymology of affiliation is, again, Latin, ad plus filius. Filius in Latin means son. So affiliation gives you a sense, gives you the perception that you've been accepted by the group and you accept the group. Accepted, not tolerated, because acceptance and tolerance are not the same. Okay, so tolerance basically means, well, look, I don't really like you, but, I'm going to put up with you. Okay, acceptance means, okay, I embrace your presence within this group. Okay, and I think one of the things that we have to do with as teachers and as group leaders, okay, is promote that sense of belongingness. Okay, so we want our students, when the class is over, okay, to say, okay, well, if it was our first class, well, yes, I think, I can find my place within this group. I feel accepted. Okay, so, and I'm looking forward to the next class. Okay, so remember that I always say that teaching is something done by people, for people, with people. It's the quintessential human endeavor. And as such, okay, we have to pay close attention to how the people feel within that group. Okay, now we talked about affiliation, this sense of belonging. Now, the opposite of affiliation is alienation, which is interesting if you think about that. Okay, because alienation is basically when a student sits at the edge of the group, okay, completely lethargic, or maybe as an outcast. So can you imagine teaching somebody who doesn't feel that they belong to that group? How are they going to behave? That's the big question, and that's why it's so, I said before, the motivation is so tricky, because sometimes, based on the student's behavior, we just say, oh, well, he doesn't seem, or she doesn't seem to be making any effort to do pair work activities or group work activities. They're not motivated. No, what we have to remember is that there's always a feeling behind somebody's behavior. So the fact that somebody doesn't mingle, okay, it may have nothing to do with the motivation. Okay, it may be a question, as I said before, that this person, hasn't found a place within the group. And so if we think that that's what the issue is, well, then we have to step in, okay, and make it happen. Because students, I've never, in 30 years experience, I've never come across a student who raises their hand and says, excuse me, Chaz, can't you see I'm feeling alienated? Do something about it. No, I have to do it. I have to keep looking at them, and see how they behave, and understand what the root cause of the behavior is, and if I can anticipate the problem and step in, with strategies that make sense to them and make sense to me. So this is really, really important, so helping people find their place in the group, helping people gel, helping people mix. As I said before, you don't necessarily want the students to become best friends. Great if it happens, but if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Okay, but you want a nice, warm, cooperative, collaborative atmosphere, because this is going to drive, okay, people's work. Okay, it's much better to work within a group, okay, where there seems to be a good sense of there's good to get that feeling of warm togetherness, that affiliation. Think about this. This is really easy to understand if you think about something from your own social life. If you're hosting a dinner party, and you invited people, who don't know each other, okay? You as the host, okay? What is one of your main tasks? One of your main tasks is to make people feel at ease, to make people feel comfortable. And so what I would do, if I know that two people play the guitar and these two people, never met before, I would go to them and say, well, you guys, you two, you have something in common. You're both guitarists. And so in so doing, okay, I'm putting them at ease, okay? And then, the conversation takes off. And what I've done is, I've helped people find common ground. Group psychologists are really big on the notion of common ground. Once people have found common ground with one another, okay, well, things take off big time, okay? That's what we do. And the reason why we do it is because when we join a group for the first time, imagine tonight you go into a yoga lesson or a Pilates lesson if you've never done Pilates. Okay, in fact, you've never done any sports for the last couple of decades. Now you don't know anybody in the group. You haven't been able to manage. You haven't been able to convince any of your friends to go with you. You don't know the instructor. Okay, you don't know anybody. How do you feel? Don't you feel apprehensive? Don't you feel nervous? Don't you have this sense of inadequacy? Oh my God, I've never done this before. What if the other people are much better than me? What if the instructor doesn't like me? What if the other people are not complete beginners? So there's this negativity, flying all over the place. Well, guess what? This is how our students feel when they join a group for the first time. What if the level of English is better than mine? What if I don't like the teacher? What if the teacher picks on me because, my level of English is not quite as good? What if I don't like the others, or they don't like me, and so on and so forth? Okay, I'm sure that for some people, when they join a new group for the first time, that there's a very high level of enthusiasm. You're looking forward to it. But I think that lo and behold, most of the time, people who join a group for the first time, they're assailed by doubts. Okay, so what if I'm not good enough? And then in a situation like this, okay, it's again the job of a leader, the job of a teacher, okay, in this case for us, to make that person, feel at ease. So common ground, that sense of belonging, okay, without which you don't have a group. If people don't feel that they belong to that particular group, then, if the group never forms, okay, it's the end of it. You can't teach 25 individuals. You have to teach a group which consists of 25 individuals. It's not the same. And if you don't have a group, you don't have anything. That's the sad truth about, working with people. This is not just for us, but if you work in a company, and if you manage a team, well, a team, you have to manage a team both at individual level, but also as a collective level. And so you need the people to feel that like they belong to that team. Okay, so one thing that, for example, if you look at U.S. colleges, invented this. They have sweatshirts like, Harvard, or baseball caps, Harvard, with the Harvard logo. That is, okay, they do it for marketing purposes. Obviously, merchandising, brings in a lot of money. But I think that fundamentally it's because if you're wearing a Harvard cap, basically you make it two statements. Your statement number one: I belong to Harvard. I go to Harvard. This is my universe. Okay, and you also make another statement. Okay, I don't belong to Yale. I don't belong to Oxford. I don't belong to Cambridge. I don't belong to Stanford. You see what I mean? It's really, really strong. It's really strong. Okay, so our job as teachers should be, at the very beginning of a group, for example, to come up with exercises. Okay, they combine a language learning element, obviously, because we teach language. Okay, with a more psychologically infused element, okay, to get the students to help the students feel more at ease. I'm going to give you an example of this. Okay, obviously, this is a webinar, so we can't do it together. But an exercise that I always do, and it works really, really well. It's very simple. You ask the students to draw 3 columns on a piece of paper. Okay, so in column number 1, they write, "That's me." In column number 2, they write, "That's not me." And in column number 3, they write, "That's me, possibly." occasionally. Then, so me, not me, that's me, occasionally. And then you read out a series of items. For example, I'm a coffee person. Okay. If the students feel that if they like coffee, okay, if they're coffee people, they write it in the first column. If they don't like coffee, they write it in the second column. If they drink coffee, but from time to time, they write it in the third column. And so then you proceed, by reading, perhaps 10 or 15 items, like, I hardly ever shop online. I prefer traveling by train to taking the plane, and so on and so forth. I never eat meat. I'm a sporty outdoor kind of type. I mean, you can come up with all sorts of different things. And then at the end of the exercise, you put the students in pairs, okay, and see, how much they have in common. Again, you're helping students find common ground. Whenever I do this exercise, okay, and I've done this exercise, with hundreds of people, students and teachers alike, the outcome is always the same. It's really hard to stop them. This is not just a speaking exercise. The reason why people find it really hard to stop talking after an exercise like this is especially when they found something in common, is because that's what humans do. When you go to a party and you meet somebody with similar or identical interests in yours, you just don't want to stop talking. The conversation moves on and moves on and moves on. And before you know it, okay, you've been talking to the same person for an hour and a half. This is what happens. So we're driven by that interest, by that thirst, that curiosity. We're intrigued by what we like the topic. So we move, within our comfort zone, and we want to know more about what the other person thinks. Sometimes we end up arguing, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but that's what common ground is all about. So when I meet a group for the first time, I don't teach complete beginners anymore, but when I used to teach complete beginners anymore, the first lesson or two, okay, I would do a lot of exercises to, I would put, the syllabus aside, and I would ask the students, I would work on group formation, I would work on group processes. Okay, so that's the first part of the acronym, G for group processes. I want to quote another student now, moving on to the P of the GPS acronym, which stands for priming. Okay, this is what Fabienne told me. I hate it when you start teaching and I'm not ready. Now, this is interesting. I'm sure you can relate to this. Now, have you ever been in a situation where you planned your lesson? You're looking forward to teaching your lesson. Perhaps, it's your favorite class. You're full of beans. You're feeling energetic. You're enthusiastic. You're dynamic. You're psychologically, mentally, physically ready to teach that class. So you march into the classroom with stacks of activities and stuff. So you're armed with an arsenal of different exercises. You're really looking forward to it. When you see your students coming in, though, their level of energy and enthusiasm, okay, doesn't quite match yours. And you go, oh dear, they're not motivated. And again, it's another mistake that most people make, okay? Just assume that the people are not energetic, the people are not enthusiastic, they come in, looking at their cell phones, they're not motivated. But wait a minute. Is it a question of motivation, or is it a question of something else? Could it not be, as Fabienne says, that there's a lack of readiness? Could it not be that they're not physically, they're here with you, but mentally and psychologically, they're somewhere else? In other words, there's a big difference between lack of motivation, which is here, it's not the case, with lack of readiness. Lack of readiness simply means that the students, okay, are not focused. Okay, the students are distracted. It's very easy to get distracted nowadays. In fact, I think that dealing with the students' attention is one of the major challenges for teachers in the 21st century. Getting the students' attention and helping the students maintain the same level of attention has never been easy. Let's face it. If you've been in the classroom for more than half an hour, you know how it is. How difficult it is to get the students, to pay attention to you and to help students, maintain the same level of attention. Now, it's much harder now. Why? Because attention is much more volatile. because, we're surrounded, by so many distractions, because attention, attention is very scarce. Everybody wants our attention. Our cell phones, our YouTube on autoplay, our Instagram, our Facebook, and you name it. So our attention has shrunk enormously over the last decade or so. It's not just the kids, it's ours as well. Okay, so one of the reasons why people seem to be reading less, even people my generation, okay, so it's because we don't seem ready, to make that mental effort that's required, to read Dostoevsky or to read a novel. Okay, so it's pretty sad. If you think about it, though, when the students are distracted, okay, they can be paying attention to you. But if they're not paying attention to you, there's nothing personal. It's simply that the students are paying attention to something else. So when the students are not ready, it's not necessarily that they don't want to be here with you. So it's not a question of motivation. It's that perhaps, they're thinking about the WhatsApp conversation that we're having just before class, or they're thinking about the exam that they have to take after class for which they haven't studied enough, and so on and so forth. So attention works like a tug of war. Have you ever played that tug of war? Like, this is, you have two teams, pulling at both extremes of a rope. And so that's pretty much what the way attention works. You have stimulus 1 and you have stimulus 2. Our job as teachers is to make the students forget about the WhatsApp conversation or the exam, okay, or the football game or whatever, okay, and get them to focus on the here and now. It's easier said than done, I know, but we have to try. Now, if you start teaching when the students are not paying attention to you, you are wasting your precious time, because it goes in one ear and out the other. Okay, so without attention, nothing registers. So the students are hearing English, but they're not listening to English. You know what I'm saying? So nothing sinks in. It's a complete waste of time. So when I work with teachers, when I say, well, look, at the beginning of class, if you think that the students are not ready for you, don't start teaching. Because if the students are not ready for you, the last thing you want to do is hit them with some language work. It's not fair. And the teachers, inevitably, they always reply, but I only have 45 minutes. But it's not a question of, how long the lesson is. It's a question of how necessary it is to invest, not spend, but invest 5 minutes of your time, 5 minutes of your lesson to get the students to actually focus on what's going on. You want the students to forget about the external stimulus. So in other words, you need to distract the students from their distraction with another distraction. So you have to help them get in a state of flow. Flow is this thing of optimal concentration. It's any teacher's holy grail. How do you do that? By designing exercises that don't necessarily require a very sophisticated linguistic outcome. Sometimes there's minimum linguistic outcome, but they require pretty high concentration. I'm going to give you an example. It's very simple. What you do is you ask two students, okay, to work in pairs. Okay, you pair the students off. You have A and B. Okay, they work together. The A are told to count from 1 to 60, okay, out loud. So they have to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And the B's, they have to count down from 60 to 1 out loud. So the A's and the B's, they start and finish at the same time. So they need to focus on what the other person is saying. So you have 1, 2, 60, 59, 58. And so if one speeds up, the other one has to catch up with them. If the other one is too slow, the other one has to slow down. They have to have the same pace. And so when I do this exercise, I'm always struck to see how people do it. And I see this intense concentration look on the face, and they go like this: 21, 23, 24. So, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. It takes 1 minute. It's 1 minute of your precious time. So although this exercise doesn't have a linguistic outcome, okay, it does serve another purpose. And that purpose is, get the students in a state of flow. Okay, when then the students are ready for you, well, then you start teaching. Even though there is no language outcome in an exercise like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because any beginner could count, from 1 to 60, if you think about it. But that's not the point. Even if there is no language outcome, okay, the truth, the issue is that you can't do the simple exercise if you're thinking about the WhatsApp conversation, or if you're thinking about the exam that comes after your lesson. And that's really what I want to do. Okay, so it's not a warm-up exercise. It's a little bit more sophisticated than a warm-up exercise. And incidentally, you can do exercises like this, not just at the beginning of a class. Okay, but you can do exercises like this whenever you think, that the student's attention is beginning to sort of, they hit a valley. Okay, so when you think, there is a slump in their attention, this is time to hit them with something that requires them to focus. They think it's a game. Let them think it's a game, by all means. Okay, but it's a pretty serious game. Okay, so that's priming. So priming is getting the students ready for a task. In obviously in my book, there's lots of different exercises to do with priming. Okay, but perhaps I want to mention another one that's very easy to do in class. You have two students working together, okay, and you ask them, to both hold a pen. Okay, they both have to hold the same pen. What you don't want to see is this. You don't want to see somebody's hand on top of the other person's hand. You want both students to drive the pen, and they use one piece of paper, and you read out a quote or anything that you 2 or 3 line paragraph, and they have to write it down, okay, together. So again, this will result in giggles. They start laughing up. That's fine. Okay, that's fine. But again, this is not an exercise you could do. Okay, if you're thinking about the WhatsApp conversation, they need to focus. If they do it well. If you have one person go like this, well, then it's you have to stop that, because they're just goofing off. But if they do it well, then I think this is an exercise that works. Okay, so moving on to the S of the acronym, that's surprise and stimulation. This is what Jean-Louis said. I have a brain, I want to use it. Okay, so basically Jean-Louis is motivated by exercises that push him to go beyond the mechanics of the language, that push him to go beyond the grammar, the vocab, the pronunciation, the word order, and the collocations, and so on and so forth. He wants more. He wants to be pushed beyond all that. So interestingly, a couple of years ago, Jim Scrivener and Adrian Underhill, they were talking about a high demand high. They launched. It wasn't a movement. It was just them, riffing about this. And I think, this is what they were talking about. Often teachers, are just satisfied and happy enough when the students produce some language. Okay, so what did you do this weekend? Well, I played football. Great. Well, no, wait a minute, push them a little further. Do you always play? Did you win? Did you lose? Did you play? Did you play with it? So this is it's a simple example. Okay, but people want to be pushed. People want to be challenged. Challenge is good. If you want the students to be in a state of flow, they need to feel challenged. Challenge is the point of balance. It's the right point of equilibrium between what an exercise asks the students to do, okay, and what the outcome of the exercise is. So if you want the students, to give you optimum concentration, if you want the students to feel sufficiently challenged, they have to find something that they can chew on. Okay, so if you ask a group of beginners, to critique a poem by William Blake, the exercise is not challenging. Okay, it's impossible. So they will never be in a state of flow. They won't be stimulated. Okay, in fact, you're killing their motivation. But if you ask a group of advanced, okay, to recite the alphabet, well, that equally is not challenging. So they might hurl furniture at you because the exercise is idiotic. It's not challenging. Okay, so that's what they mean. So how the question you can ask me at this point is, okay, fine, but how do I do that? Well, I think, I don't, I don't really use the word recipe or tips as applied to education and teaching. But there are strategies. Okay, so first of all, let me tell you what surprise means. Surprise is the gap between reality and expectations. So if you tell your students today we're going to do a listening comprehension exercise, well, the students immediately they're going to start thinking, okay, we've done this before, so now he's going to set up the context. Okay, now we're gonna have some pre-listening or pre-reading questions. Okay, and then he's going to play the recording, and then he's going to quiz us on the questions. Okay, so those are the schemata, the mental schemata that the students activate prior to the listening exercise. Why? Because they've done it before. So it's not surprising. That's the reality. Okay, so when you say we're going to do a reading comprehension exercise or we're going to do a listening comprehension exercise, that's exactly what they're going to be thinking. Now, that's fine. I'm not saying, that there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so I think, an element of routine is actually very helpful. Okay, however, routine, if we're not careful, routine leads to boredom, and boredom certainly is not good to have in our classroom. Okay, so now if you want to shake them up a bit, okay, if you want to jazz it up, and okay, fine, don't say we're going to do a reading comprehension exercise. Perhaps do something completely different. Okay, so introduce the reading in a completely different manner. So disrupt their expectations. Okay, disrupt the mental schemata. So you want to lead the students to say, oh, wait a minute. Okay, but we've never done this before. So I want to see what happens. Oh, this is new. I want to see what happens. Okay, so this is how you get them on board. This is how you stimulate them, at least, in this case, intellectually, cognitively. In order for us to do all this, okay, we obviously need to be creative. I've always, well, for the last 15 years at least, I've been talking about the need for creative teaching. Creativity cannot be looked at as an add-on. Creativity is not something that we do for fun. Creativity is not something that we do when we have time to do something off the wall. I think creativity, and in fact, by creativity, I mean creative pedagogy. I think creativity should be at the core of what we do, because creativity, so when you do something creative, an activity is creative if it's original and if it has pedagogical value. When you do something that's new, okay, that leads to surprise. And when the students are surprised, guess what happens? They pay attention. And when the students pay attention, they're more focused, so they're more motivation, which in turn may be, okay, that the students, because of them more motivated, they're going to achieve, higher results. So there is an interconnection between the teacher's creativity and the student's own motivation. So we're not going to focus on creativity here because that's not the point of the talk. But I mean, you cannot, from my standpoint, you can't really talk about creating a motivating environment if you don't mention creativity. So the teacher's creativity, okay, is instrumental, because in order for us to be able to come up with exercises that surprise our students and lead them to listen to us, blah blah, we need to be more creative. So if you rely on a course book is not going to do it for you. So a course book is good, okay, but I would be really hard pressed, to come up with a course book that's not good nowadays. That's not the point. But you still need creativity, even if you're using a very good book. And the creativity is, to supplement something from the book in a different manner. So use the book, rely on the book, okay, but try from time to time to disrupt that routine, to get the students, out of a rut, okay. Try and inject a little bit of life in the course, because that's the thing. Okay, so you don't want routine, to set in. That's the way I see it. I said I wasn't going to use the word recipe, but in fact, this is the only exception. there's an American writer, his name is John Fanslow. He's written lots of stuff, in our field. Unfortunately, he's not very well known in Europe. His basic idea, or how he said, we need to break rules in education, because if you don't break rules, you're gonna get stuck in a rut. And I think he's right. If you think about it, teaching is a very highly routinized profession. Okay, so if we don't watch it, before you know it, if you keep doing the same old thing, day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, you get burned out. It's there's no question about it. There's no doubt about it. So what John Fanslow advocates, in order for us, to stave off that routine, is to basically say, well, think about something that you do with your classes. Okay, and then recipe number one, do the opposite of what you do. Okay, so I'll give you some practical examples. I've learned this from my friend and colleague, Mario Rimbalukri. When I meet a group for the first time, okay, I have no idea what the preferences are in terms of, error feedback, okay, in terms of error correction. So when I pair them off, okay, I have two basic strategies, or three, basically. If I hear a mistake, I could choose to ignore it, okay, or I could step in and correct the mistake, okay, and nip it in the bud on the spot, okay, or three, okay, I can make a written note or a mental note and go over the mistake once the pair work is over, okay. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's pretty, that's fair, okay, that's okay. However, this is how I do it now. When I meet a group for the first time, I take a Post-it, okay, actually two, and I write on one, please disturb, and on the other one, please do not disturb. And I ask the students to choose, okay, which one they should have in front of on the desk. If the students in pairs, if they go for please disturb, well then, okay, if I hear a mistake, okay, that's going to give me license to step in and correct the mistake and interrupt the students, okay. But if the students write please do not disturb, that is a sign for me, okay, that I need to deal with the mistake once a pair work is over, because perhaps, the students don't like being interrupted, and because they lose the flow, and so on and so forth. I think it's a very humanistic way of doing it, because you respect the students' wishes and the students' ways of learning, and at the same time, you stop making assumptions on behalf of the students. So it's the opposite of something that I used to do, for example. The other thing that you could do is, you think about something that you've done with your classes and you do something completely different. So we don't have time to go into this now, and otherwise, I will show you a couple of ways of different ways of dealing with texts, for example. Okay, so, but I'm sure you can come up with something with lots of examples yourself. Think about something you've done with your classes. Okay, do something different just to surprise them. And three, okay, think about something you've been doing with your classes and then stop doing it altogether for a little bit of time and see what happens. Another example that it just came to my mind. I realized, that for a long time I was just using the board to highlight the students' mistakes after group work or pair work, and I realized, in fact, the board was like, it was a table of sins. I was using the board just to get the students to focus on what they can't do. And I think it's wrong. I think now, I learned that, in fact, I use the board, primarily, okay, to highlight good examples of language. Okay, because that's the danger. And that's also what's demotivating. When you correct students' mistakes, okay, it's part of our job, yes, but if that's all we do, okay, without highlighting, without letting the students know that, okay, I love this, I heard somebody use this idiom or this collocation, that's great, that's very good use of language. So if we can balance things out, okay, on the board, or even when we talk to our students, I think it's much more efficient and motivating. It goes back to what I was saying in terms of, the way of communication strategies. The way we talk to our students could have a huge motivating or demotivating impact. You probably remember the famous Pygmalion study, 1956, Rosenthal, a psychologist in the United States. What he did was he took 50 students, okay, and he split them up into two groups. and he gave them two different tasks. Okay, actually, it was the same task, sorry, but the instructions were different. Okay, to one group, he said, "Look, this task is above your head. This is going to be very difficult. I doubt you're going to be able to do it." The other group, they were presented with the same task, and the teacher, but the instructions were different. The teacher said, "This is going to be a walk in the park for you. We did something similar last week. Okay. I know that you can do it and you can do it well. You're going to cruise through it." Guess what happened? The students who had heard the teacher saying, "Well, look, I don't think you can do it," obviously they didn't do it. They didn't succeed. They failed. But the students, who knew that the teacher believed in them, we did something similar. I know you can do it, and I know you can do it well. They took off. So this is one thing, I think, it resonates, or perhaps it should resonate with the way we talk. It's similar kind of thing, when you say to your students, the students are walking into the room and you go, "Ooh, oh dear, you're not motivated." Well, maybe it's a question of motivation, but if it's a question of energy, okay, I now ask the students, okay, so if I suspect the students are running low on energy, well, then I ask the students, from 0 to 5, how much energy do you have? And if they say 0, I'll take it. I have to accept it. But the issue here is that whatever they come up with, it's their thought. It's not my thought. So I'm not deciding on behalf of the students. I'm not saying anymore, "You're not motivated." No, I let this, or you have no energy. You all look tired. Well, maybe, but maybe not all of them. And maybe it's not true. Maybe they're worried. Maybe the body language betrays something deeper. I don't know. I have no idea. I have to stop myself from making assumptions on behalf of the students, because I've learned that when you make assumptions on behalf of the students, 99.9% of the times you get it wrong. And that's WRONG, guys. Let the students tell you how they feel, rather than being told how they feel by you. I think if you think about it, it's not just demotivating, but it's deeply disrespectful. It reminds me of the famous joke, when two psychologists, meet at a party, and one says to the other, "You're doing fine. How am I doing?" But that's a joke about psychologists. Here it's a completely different thing. And so that's another point. Another example of a very bad, by bad I mean demotivating communication strategies. When we give feedback to the students, often we say, "Great job," or "Well done." But you may think this is positive because you're saying good job or great job or well done. But it's very vague and it's not informative. The student is left to wonder, what did the teacher like? How can I repeat my success? How can I replicate my success? What did he like precisely? Was it my pronunciation? Was it the content? Imagine a presentation. Student is giving a presentation, and the teacher at the end says, "Great job." That's it. But this is one of the worst ways of giving feedback ever, because it's completely vague. Completely vague. You want the students to replicate that success, so you have to give them a little bit more information. Similarly, when you tell the students, for example, "Good job, but you're still behind," what you're doing, by saying so, is you're encouraging a comparison with the rest of the group. So group pressure, it's magnified and stuff like that. I don't think it's a good way of doing it. It's demotivating. Much better to say, for example, "Good job. I could see that you made a lot of progress in this area compared to what you were doing 2 or 3 weeks ago." So the benchmark should be the student himself or herself, not the other people in the group. So you're encouraging a comparison with work that the student was producing 2 or 3 weeks earlier. Okay, so this is going to help him or her considerably in saying, "Okay, well, I know I'm on track. Okay, I know how I can replicate my success." So there are things that we have to tweak in the way we speak to our students. So we have a couple of minutes left. What I want to do is now is Okay, if you want to get in touch, but I want to try and tie things up, with that. I did say at the beginning that motivation is a very complex, vast phenomenon. Okay, and I hope I've been in this 60 minutes or so. I've just scratched the surface of what's lying underneath. Okay, so I don't think there is a wonderful, a silver bullet, a magic fix for motivation. I don't think so. I wish, but I don't think so. For the reasons that I highlighted at the beginning and throughout this talk, that it's a very personal journey. It's something that either you have it or you don't have it. Okay, so, but the difficulty for us is that although you can't motivate the students to do anything, okay, you can do a lot of stuff as teachers to demotivate them, and that's the frustration, So, but I think that if we focus on creating an environment which is conducive to the students, motivate themselves, well, I think, that we will have done our job if we're able to do that. Okay, but it takes time, and I think, that we need to be patient, and really let's think about the role, the central role, and the importance and the value of creative teaching in all this. So in the book I wrote for Helbling in 2017, I speak about the three parts of the acronym, the G for group dynamics or group processes, priming, and surprise and stimulation. And I illustrate how these principles work in practice, with several practical exercises, which don't require a lot of preparation and could travel a long way in class. So I hope you've enjoyed this talk. I've certainly enjoyed talking to you, even though I can't see you. And I don't know if we have time for questions. I mean, I'm happy to try and answer your questions if you have any. Thank you very much, and thank you to Helbling once again for inviting me to talk about one of my favorite topics ever. Thank you.
Chaz, thank you for an absolutely fantastic talk. Plenty of food for more research. People asking how they can get in touch with you. So great that you've put your contact details there on screen. And for those of you that are interested, I'll leave that up on the screen just for a moment. If you are not already registered, if you're interested in attending further talks or finding out more about the book that Chaz has written for us for Helbling, then please, I'm going to share on screen now the various ways that you can stay in touch with Helbling. So we have our Facebook page, our readers blog with lots of teaching tips on there, our YouTube channel, which is where you'll be able to find the full recording of today's webinar, as well as our Instagram page. And like I say, if you're not already registered, sign up for the teachers newsletter and you'll get reminders about all of these events and the recording.